Everybody, can I have your attention, please? Hi, everybody. Welcome. I know many of you are probably not here because you're ApoE4 carriers, and some of you are, so welcome. This is our third annual meetup of ApoE4.Info, and we have many of our community members here and some guests on the welcome all. We have some members who've traveled from halfway around the world to be here, namely Andrea from New Zealand. Thank you, thank you, thank you all for being here. ApoE4 carriers especially, every single one of you, whether you know it or not, are activists. By working together, we have come such a long way. When I learned about my ApoE4 homozygote status 5 years ago, I was told Alzheimer's can't be prevented, and I was also told I should square dance and do crossword puzzles. That's where medical science was. And by banding together, we've zeroed in on strategies that will undoubtedly help us mitigate the pathologies associated with this gene. So you're all activists. You all put a face to the gene. And by doing so, you encourage researchers, practitioners, and physicians to pay attention to us. Also, by continuing to work with the media, we raise public awareness about ApoE4, and we also disseminate what we've learned. We have a Stat News reporter with us today. Megan, thank you so much. And thank you for the ApoE4 carriers who've met with her already. She's going to be in the lobby tomorrow from noon until 1:30. So if you've not interviewed yet and you want to share what it's like to be an ApoE4 carrier, please feel free to spend some time with her. She'll just be in the main lobby. I'm so excited to introduce, I know so many of you are here to see Dave. Dave Feldman is the author of Cholesterol Code. He's a software engineer by day and an intrepid bioengineer by night. And I think it's very safe to say that I know of no one else who's given more blood, sweat, or tears to this science as far as elucidating diet-lipid interactions. I think what he's uncovered is nothing short of jaw-dropping, and in many ways he's turned mainstream medicine upside down. And I'm so excited to hear what he has to say. So thank you for joining us.
They usually do this, they do a little conflicts of interest, and I have none. In fact, my wife points this out quite a bit. She would like it if I had a little bit of conflict of interest. And I'm going to warn you that this is it, because I've been given enough time that I can completely reprogram the way you think of cholesterol. So this is your last chance. If you want to go ahead and get something else and keep up with those statins, this is a good time to do that.
We're a cult, you know that. We're the anti-statin cult.
This is me a few years ago. I'm a business developer and entrepreneur, but I tend to think of myself above and beyond as a software engineer. I wrote my first line of code when I was 13. And you can tell an engineer not by what they're putting together, but early on by what they're taking apart to look at what's inside. This, of course, is me now. And when I started keto in April of 2015, I had 7 months of bliss until, of course, I got my first cholesterol score, where it skyrocketed. Total cholesterol at 329. Yeah, kind of went dark after that. And then I started to learn everything that I could about the cholesterol and lipid system. And in doing so, I found out that actually there are a lot of cholesterol changes you can expect on a low-carb diet. Generally, most people adopting a low-carb, high-fat diets, either LDL cholesterol go up or down marginally. But there's a small fraction of us who are typically called hyper-responders in the low-carb community. And this was also the first time that I saw or heard about this ApoE4 allele, which which apparently had a little more predominance with those people that actually turned out to be hyper-responders. A little more on that in a bit. So, higher cholesterol equals higher mortality, right? But very early on, and I'm talking in the very first week that I started reading about this, I noticed actually, no. First of all, the most obvious one of all. The elderly population should show a pronounced curve of mortality for those with naturally higher cholesterol. Like, it's really pretty simple. If you're getting to a danger zone of, let's say, 300, then as you get up there to around like age 80, age 90, and so forth, there just shouldn't be anybody left that has naturally high LDL cholesterol, correct? Okay, also, statins are excellent at lowering cholesterol. They're just horrible at lowering cardiovascular risk. An NNT of 104 means that it's the number needed to treat. That means there needs to be 104 people that take a statin before you see a mortality benefit with cardiovascular disease. I want you to really think about that. It succeeds at lowering LDL quite a bit, yet you get very little benefit for what the cardiovascular disease is, and I'm not even going to go into all of the detriments that can come into it. So, with that amount and that degree, it leads me to believe that actually, in many ways, the statin industry is proving to me why the lipid hypothesis is so flimsy. Okay, so now I want to introduce you to the incredible cyanide diet. Let me get back to this last data point. Cholesterol studies often omit or conceal all-cause mortality. So in this little fictional study, right, I have a control group of about 10,000. Sure enough, a third of them died of cardiovascular disease. A third of them died of cancer. And there's, of course, all these other ways in which they die that are fairly common. But you know what? This amazing cyanide diet, nobody died of cardiovascular disease. Nobody died of cancer. Nobody died of infection, of autoimmune, or Alzheimer's disease, right? In which case, I can say correctly that those people who took the cyanide diet, their chance of dying of cardiovascular disease dropped by 100%, right? There's really only one person that died in the cyanide group, and that's the person who got injured on the drive to the lab. So really, all joking aside, I need to know who lives longer. Never again put a study in front of me that doesn't show all-cause mortality, because all it can mean is that you died of something else sooner, and that can somehow cook your data to look better for the benefit that you see of all of these things, which is completely ridiculous. I can't even believe it's allowed, honestly. All right, so now it's time to put on your engineering glasses. You got them ready? It's like the 3D glasses, okay? All right, because now, in order for me to teach you the most important thing you need to know about cholesterol, we need to get to what the original problem is and how it got solved. So, most of you already know this. Cells are the building blocks of life. One cell to many, and in our case, we have about 100 trillion each, give or take about a dozen trillion cells. But our cells have a little bit of a problem. Most of them are in tissues, and they can't go anywhere. They're kind of stuck. So what did we do? We went ahead and set up a series of canals that actually move in and out of it called the bloodstream, right? But there's a little bit of an issue. We need them to actually move around, so we have this nice central muscle that helps push things around through the bloodstream. And that's good because these cells have stuff that we need to get to them. They're very self-contained and they do a lot on their own, but there's still stuff we need to provide them. So let's kind of break that out into two categories. This is the easy stuff that cells need. First of all, there's glucose in the form of energy, right? There's vitamins, all the B vitamins, vitamin C, and there's other stuff, for example, some amino acids and so forth. These things that I'm talking about, they are hydrophilic. Hydro for water, philic for love, right? But then there's this other testy category, the hard to get stuff that cells still need, right? That includes this other form of energy, a fatty acid. This also includes all the vitamins A, D, E, and K, and yes, cholesterol. Cells need cholesterol. Quick trivia question for anybody. Go ahead and feel free to shout it out. Which of the cells in our body need cholesterol? It's a good audience. I like this. All right. Okay, so these are hydrophobic things, right? And in particular, these are lipids. They're fat soluble. Well, this poses a very big problem. The problem is the bloodstream is water soluble, right? So those things that are hydrophilic, oh, we can just dump them in, they'll get pushed around just fine. But the things that are hydrophobic, and in particular the lipids, they've got a problem. We can't just dump them in. Have you ever mixed oil and water? It's exactly the same chemical reaction, right? All right, so what did we do? Millions of years before us humans came along, the animal kingdom, their R&D department, they introduced the lipid-carrying protein. This is a Steve Jobs like moment. Go ahead and applause. Thank you. I take all the credit. We go ahead and shorten this to lipoprotein, lipid lipoprotein, right? And this is distinguished by the fact that this has a phospholipid shell. Phospholipids, as you learn a little bit of biochemistry, mean that they are polar on the outside, which means that they swim just fine. They're hydrophilic on the outside. But yet, on the inside, they're lipophilic, as in they're very friendly to go ahead and put the fats into. This apoprotein, you may have heard about the first time here, right? An apo is actually short for apolipoprotein. And it has a lot of different jobs on the outside to facilitate its functionality. We'll get into that in just a moment. But let's go ahead and now talk about what happened. What happened was, instead of making a different lipoprotein for every single lipid, we went ahead and put them all in there. We put in the triglycerides. We put in the fat-soluble vitamins. And we put in the cholesterol. And I want to take one big, long, dramatic pause here, because this is the moment. This is the reason I've taken so much time to talk you through the original problem, because the solution is originally to the problem of transportation. What's important for you to know here is this cholesterol does not ride alone. It rides with all of its travel mates here. And what's predominantly inside this lipoprotein right now? Triglycerides. What are triglycerides? Energy. They're a bundle of 3 fatty acids. And let me tell you, the story of lipoproteins is mainly one of energy. So, triglycerides, cholesterol, fat-soluble vitamins. We're going to return to this again soon. Now the process. This is a way oversimplified version of it, but I'm going to talk you through the basics, which is in the bloodstream, right at this moment in time, you've got little guys like this, the glucose, and you've got big guys like this, the lipoproteins, which, by the way, they are way, 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 way more massive than that. They're gigantic motherships that include a Home Depot, a grocery store, and a vitamin cottage. They've got lots in supply, let me tell you. So what happens is you've got these receptors on the endothelial cells that can quickly snatch these glucose molecules, and you know what? They're just a little tiny snack. They're just eaten, and like that, they become ATP, they're done. But the lipoproteins, these motherships, they actually can bind through those apolipoproteins to specific receptors, and those receptors are like being able to talk to specific items that they want. You find out that there's actually lots of different receptors for lots of different apolipoproteins. It's an amazing biological device that's multi-stage and multifunctional. It's why, in a lot of ways, if you're like me, you're going to find you get pretty excited about it. But not all of you are going to be like me. Okay, now I wanted to introduce you to the 2 classifications you hear about all the time, which of course are the low-density lipoprotein and the high-density lipoprotein. And while we're on the subject, I want you to memorize it this way, because what you're seeing right now is them exchanging these apolipoproteins. And that's because a lot of people mistakenly think these 2 are separate elements. They are not. They talk to each other all the time. There's a lot of chatting, not just between all of the lipoproteins and the endothelial cells. There's a lot of chatting between each other, and they cross-regulate. I'm going to show you a scary graph in a little while that's going to freak you out, but now that you've seen this, it won't freak you out quite as much. Okay, now, taking all of this into account, and how much the liver is a central regulator, but still not the only regulator, that all of these, in chatting to each other, regulate to each other, you can understand why I, as a software engineer, saw early on a familiar pattern. This is a network. I assert to you now, and forever, that I feel very confident that the lipid system is ultimately going to turn out to be very much like a brain. That all of these are distributed objects, and only collectively can there be an enormous amount of intelligence metabolically within our bodies. This is that scary association I was going to show you. But don't worry, we're not going to spend a lot of time on it. What I want to tell you, though, is that this is the pattern that looks familiar to me. This looks like a distributed object network. All right, let's go ahead and head back to 2015 in my story once again. And this is my favorite graph. It only has 2 data points. But again, when I got that 329, that was at the end of November 2015. And my daily average of dietary fat was 224 grams. Then for 2 weeks, while I was waiting on getting another test, I was depressed. So my dietary fat went down along with all of my calories. And I felt miserable. I went ahead and meagerly went to get the next blood test. And to my shock, it jumped up by 100 points. Here's the catch. Even though it jumped up 100 points, I was genuinely excited. I was enamored. I thought, actually, everything I've been reading conventionally has to be wrong. My saturated fat went way down. Sure, I lost weight, and we hear a lot about how losing weight can activate a lot of lipoproteins, but by that time I learned enough about lipidology to know, nope, that didn't make enough sense. There may actually be a regulatory component in here, and that's what started my journey. So, after that, I dedicated myself to being an extreme N of 1. And what does that involve? Lots and lots of data collection. I take markers on myself every morning, from glucose to ketones to blood pressure, and yes, I dare you guys to try to catch me one time eating and not taking pictures of what I eat, because I take pictures of my supplements, I take pictures of my drinks, I take pictures of my water. I quit Coke Zero, don't worry. These are old pictures. Although now they dropped off the aspartame, go figure. And particularly on most of my pictures in the last about 9 months, I typically have my left hand in there even if I'm measuring, because the left hand always being in the picture, kind of a signature now. It does mean that I have the ability to audit the volume of size, because it's a reference, and it becomes very important. I have a whole write-up on there if you ever want to visit on my blog. Now, why do I do that? Because I also have some blood tests. Yeah, I've had about 74 blood tests in the last 20 months. And that does not include the new cardio check tests, which I'll get a chance to get into a little bit later. But basically, I capture a lot of data on my lipids. And why do I do this? Why do I track my food so closely? Why do I track my lipids so closely? It's so that I can bring you the inversion pattern. More fat, less cholesterol. And really, truly, this sounds oversimplified, but it's not. All things controlled and all other things being equal, you eat more fat, you get less LDL cholesterol on your blood tests. You eat less fat, more LDL cholesterol on your blood tests. Let me show you the evidence. Before I do, though, let's revisit this. Everything you're going to see forward past this point that's in purple, that's going to designate LDLP. Those are the boats, the lipoprotein boats. And every time you see the blue, that's going to be cholesterol, LDLC. But is cholesterol the predominant thing that's inside this lipoprotein? No. What's the predominant thing that's inside this lipoprotein? Triglycerides. What are triglycerides? Energy. Thank you. Okay. I go to Low Carb Vail, the very first low carb conference I've gone to last year, and I had 8 data points. I then stalk all the doctors there, asking them as much as I could get, and then ultimately, Ivor Cummins, the only other fellow engineer, goes ahead and entertains me, and I say, I'm going to go ahead and try to do this experiment, because I think the only way that I can do this is to go ahead and see if I can replicate this by getting my blood drawn every single day. At least one time, to see if I can induce this pattern. So this time, I'm eating low at the beginning, and then ultimately bringing it up to see if I can induce the pattern on the other side. And that's exactly what happened. Then, being an engineer, went ahead and stepped on the gas. Why not go ahead and bring it up to 349 grams of fat? And then see what happens to my LDL cholesterol. Drops to 218, which at this point in time ends up being the lowest that I'd had. So, what is this? I'll break it down very slowly. This is the inversion pattern for LDLC. You take the resulting LDLC the morning of the blood test and you look backwards 3 days. So if I'm going to take today, Thursday, if I took the blood test this morning, then what I would do is I would look back to Wednesday, yesterday, the day before that Tuesday, the day before that Monday. And when I look back on those 3 days, that 3-day window has the greatest impact, the greatest influence on my cholesterol numbers. I know this because this next graph I show you goes all the way up to August of last year. And this dotted line only represents that 3-day window, only. To put it a different way, I can ignore days -4 and backwards, right? Now, to really show the inverse association between this, I'm going to go ahead and flip this axis. You ready? Go ahead and tell me these lines have nothing to do with each other. For those people who are geeks, talk about those guys way in the back over there. Pearson looks amazing at a -0.8, and of course the regression, the R-squared, is fantastic at 0.648. Remember, each of these couplings, each of them only comprise the morning of the blood test and the 3 days that are just before it. That's it. All other data is being ignored. This is for HDLC, which also is being impacted by that same 3-day window, right? And as you can see, it's a positive correlation, as in the more fat I eat, the more I bring up my HDLC. What I find fascinating is it seems to have a little bit of a floor. While I'm on this low-carb diet, it seems that even when my fat dropped low enough, it still actually didn't go much further below that. Okay, it turned out that LDLP, the boats themselves, they actually went on a different timeline, and this got discovered in that 1-week experiment. There seemed to be a delay. Eventually, I found out from crunching the numbers that LDLP, you ignore the 2 days before, and then you look at the 3-day window of the 5 days before, the 4 days before, and the 3 days before. So again, to use Thursday as an example, I ignore yesterday and the day before, and I start on Monday. Monday, Sunday, and Saturday. And looking at just that window, you get a graph like this. Same all the way up to August, right? The dotted line's a little bit different because it comprises that period. But now I'm going to go ahead and flip this left axis. And once again, you can see the inversion. The Pearson and the regression are actually even a little bit better in this case. All right. Real quick, I'm going to also show small LDLP cholesterol, which likewise tends to go with LDLP, its total cousin. And without question, the higher my dietary fat, the more it flattened out. I would actually have this down to 0, but they have that less than 90 and we don't know marker, which I typically get all the time now because I eat lots and lots of dietary fat. All right, so here's the theory behind the inversion. And I'm going to say that basically it's Occam's razor. There really are a lot of different possibilities, but this seems to be the one that strikes me the most given all of the data that I have up to this point and how my research is showing it. I got to revisit this one more time. What everyone on a low-carb diet should know is that a low-density lipoprotein has many jobs, many more than I cover in this presentation, from pathogen binding to how it distributes the fat-soluble vitamins. But its primary job is to distribute energy from fat. Really want to drive that point home. So I'm going to put this in all caps, boldface, underline. In fact, I'm going to extrude it in 3D and outline it, and put a nice fat arrow here to once again point out that triglycerides are the primary payload. When it leaves the dock, either in the gut or in the liver, its primary payload is triglycerides, and you know what? It's going to drop those off, guaranteed. Does it drop off the cholesterol anywhere close to as much as it drops off the triglycerides? The answer is no. So, my favorite analogy, and apparently everyone else's from the feedback I get, is the cruise ship, right? So if the boat is the low-density lipoprotein, the LDL particle, right? What are the triglycerides? Passengers. Passengers. They're getting on, they're getting off, they're getting on, they're getting off. That's kind of what they do. So what's the cholesterol in this?
Stats.
Raptors.
The life rafts. Now, would it be correct for me to say the purpose of a cruise ship is to move around life rafts? No. I could say a job of a cruise ship is to move around life rafts. It's absolutely true. That is a job. And you wouldn't get on a cruise ship that did not have life rafts on it. Right?
Yeah.
But really, the job of a cruise ship is to move around passengers. There's no question that is its primary job. And it's the primary job of the low-density lipoprotein to move around triglycerides. All right, now we need to break up the lipoproteins, particularly the low-density lipoproteins, into two classifications And that's what you'll need in order to tie this all together to understand the inversion pattern. The first type you may have heard of, they're called chylomicrons. They come from the gut, or more specifically from food you just ate. So if you just had some food, sure enough, the fat-based energy ends up getting packaged into the chylomicrons, and very quickly, and I like to call these guys the sprinters, they very quickly drop off those triglycerides, and in a matter of minutes to hours at the most, they're gone. They're done, right? The other major classification, the other major origin of low-density lipoproteins are from storage, and that you're going to be getting from the liver. They're called VLDLs, very low-density lipoproteins. And while they originate, I like to call them the distance runners, because they keep going and going. And well into as much as 4 days later, they're still hanging out, right? Why is this so important? Because if you're getting a cholesterol test, like me, you should be fasting 12 to 14 hours. These guys are gone. These guys are still around. That means cholesterol found inside of VLDL originating lipoproteins is all that's getting picked up. So, to simplify this, you could imagine that perhaps the body is looking at the last 3 days, taking an assessment of what the total amount of energy intake is. And in the case of lots and lots of incoming energy, where I'm eating tons and tons of fat, well then, there's less of a reason for it to go ahead and upregulate the VLDLs. We're trying to compensate for the energy difference, right? But conversely, if all of a sudden there's very little incoming energy from the GI tract, well then actually it needs to upregulate the VLDLs. Why does that matter? Because if you get a cholesterol test right about now, you're going to show very high cholesterol because it's picking up the cholesterol in those VLDLs. That's really all there is to it. All right, so now I get to show you what happened with distance running. Because I took you up to August of last year. The reason I stopped there is because from August until January of this year, did a few things with my wife. We did a lot of running. That's me on the left, I'm Groot. She's on the right, Rocket. Right? And throughout all of this time, we did all of this running, and I was mindful to keep categorically different the period of time which I intentionally was trying to be sedentary, and this period of time where I was running because I anticipated it would impact my lipid numbers. I was right. You see the area over here that's glowing, right? That's the period of time in which I was doing the distance running. And now that we flip this axis, before I do it, I've got to say I have a huge advantage. You guys don't. I have my inversion pattern mapped. Because I have it mapped, I know where it should land. And therefore, I can see a gap. In this case, a gap to where we anticipated my LDL cholesterol would have landed, right? When you learn about lipidology, you learn about why cells would need cholesterol. One of the reasons you learn about it is something called endocytosis, which is just a fancy way of saying a cell eats an entire LDL particle. Why would it do that? Because, as it turns out, cells have cholesterol and also phospholipids. Remember phospholipids? Very handy that phospholipids and cholesterol are what make up an LDL particle, and yet it's also what cells can potentially need to repair themselves. It's the building blocks of cells. So I was fully expecting that my LDL-C would drop, and that's why I wanted to keep it categorically separate. And not only that, to my delight, my biggest gaps made the most sense. Because at the beginning of my training, I did a cold open, where I should have trained about 3 months, but instead I started about 6 weeks from the half marathon, which those of you who run know why that's so bad. So I'm doing like a 7-mile run after, in my first week. This first cholesterol test was 2 days after that 7-mile run. I was sore as heck, so I was not surprised at all. That last data point, the other largest gap, guess when that was? After my only full marathon. That's right. Sure enough, we see a very similar pattern with LDLP, also fairly large gaps. But what I was the most interested in was the triglycerides. Because after all, even though triglycerides are one of the noisiest markers I go with, and it makes sense since it's energy depletion on the fly, I anticipated that there would be much more depletion that would happen in the wake of all of this exercise. And that's exactly what happened. These 3 markers were all 24 hours after a half marathon, and a full marathon. And to date, they're my lowest 3 triglyceride scores. So without question, being powered by fat, I could actually see what the difference would be. All right, now I want to talk about lean mass hyperresponders. The most commented post that I think I put up yet, I think it's at 111 counting, is still pretty young. I had actually posted this, I want to say, about a month and a half ago. And it exploded because I've seen this pattern so many times, and this all ties back into the general theory, which is that in a particular pattern, if cholesterol scores can be higher for those who are lean and or athletic on a low-carb diet. And that is because when you're on a low-carb diet, you have lower glycogen stores. The tank is lower, right? Don't get me wrong, you don't have empty glycogen stores, but relative to somebody who's on a carb-centric diet that's constantly topping off their glycogen stores, your status is not quite as much, right? Also, when you have lower body fat, lower adipose stores. Think about this. The 2 biggest storage tanks are just a little bit lower, yet you have higher energy demands. So it makes perfect sense to me that your body feels the need to upregulate bioavailability of energy. Because when you look at this pattern and all the context I've told you about at this point, LDL is above 200, HDL is above 80, triglycerides are 70 or lower. That suggests you're trafficking more of the boats, and you know what? You have to, because the energy is getting pulled off the boats at a higher rate, right? That's why you always need to keep thinking about this above and beyond, first and foremost, as an energy distribution system, and then all of this stuff will start making sense to you. All right. I don't know if you guys heard about this. There's an ApoE allele, right? Highest correlation for high carb, or for low carb hyperresponders. Now that I've had the advantage of having people send me their labs all the time, I've gotten a chance to actually counterbalance a lot of these patterns. I used to lament being really upset that other doctors, I'm not a doctor. I used to lament doctors that I would talk to who were low-carb doctors had this nice practice full of people, and so they had all this great data to be able to compare people as to, you know, what actually constituted a hyperresponder, what didn't. I was jealous of that. That jealousy is long gone now, because I get people sending me labs, several in a day, all the time. They're tweeting me their labs, they're commenting their labs, etc. So I get plenty of hyperresponder labs to compare, right? And when I can, when they seem to be very dedicated at capturing a lot of data, I try to fit in the ApoE4 allele question. Because I've assumed up to this point that that would be the highest corollary between being a hyperresponder. But actually, lots of 2-3s, 2-4s, and 3-3s are hyperresponders. In fact, honestly, and it's a bit anecdotal, I haven't done all the number crunching, but hyperresponders are only slightly more prevalent. More prevalent, for sure, but only slightly. What do I find the higher prevalence with? Lean mass hyperresponders. And in fact, most of those that I see in the 2-3s, 2-4s, 3-3s tend to be leaner. And they tend to be, a lot of them started at a much heavier weight, got all the way down, and then all of a sudden their cholesterol went up afterwards. So it's almost as if they became well, and then they see their cholesterol numbers shoot through the roof, and they wonder what they're doing wrong. Now, before I get to this next part, but the ApoE4 in particular, I need to distinguish this important difference. I'm going to get you back into that engineering mindset between functionality and configuration. And I can do this pretty easily using a clock analogy. So, with a clock, you know that there's pretty much one function. It's supposed to show you the time at the time that you're looking at it, right? All right. Now, if it's not providing the time at the moment that you're looking at it, it's because either it's broken, as in one of the pulleys isn't getting, is mistimed, maybe one of the cogs are misshapen, or maybe it's just missing a cog altogether, it's just straight up not working, right? Or it's misconfigured. In the case of a misconfigured clock, it's just set to the wrong time, right? That's all there is to it. So in that case, it can actually be functioning just fine. But you know what? A misconfiguration can be a problem. Now you're missing your meetings, right? You're not picking up the kids from school on time. That can still be a problem. Well, I want you to look again real quick at the graphs I've been showing you. And I want you to guess for me whether I think that this is a dysfunctional system. I do not think this is a dysfunctional system at all. I think this is actually one of the most amazingly functional systems I've seen. Again, I work on systems for a living, right? But a pro-lipid hypothesis person could walk in here and could say, but Dave, maybe it's misconfigured. Maybe, even though it's functioning correctly, it's still bringing around too many lipids into your system, and that is in fact going to kill you long term. And I would have to concede that point. That's a lot harder to prove or disprove. But getting back to the ApoE4s, I've got to show something. The functionality is the one that usually gets brought up. And this, I'm so glad that the Ketogane seminar people are back there in the back, because this was the first public presentation of my data, and this was the result that came out of it. I was eating huge amounts of fat throughout that seminar. And when I did so, I proved one of my favorite things that I hear all the time, which is small, dense LDL particles are one of the most difficult things to clear. It can show that your system is broken, that is dysfunctional. And yet, my small LDL particles dropped to less than 90. They basically just disappeared in a matter of 3 days. So, all of this I hear about clearance, that it's broken, there's a traffic jam, and the ability of the body to clear it. I can tell you, I make my numbers go up and down like crazy. I'm a cholesterol traveler. There's nobody who can change their numbers like I can, and I'm only doing it by changing the energy. That's it. So looking back on this again, I'm going to tell you something. For those people who are ApoE4 right now, I'm going to tell you that I find that I have a lot of reason to think this is actually a configuration file. Because when you have something that's touching so many different systems at once, then I'm still thinking of the clock. Even though you may change the crown on a clock to adjust it to the right size, are you only moving one gear? No, you're moving several different gears. So when somebody says, here's the reference range for a one-size-fits-all on your LDL-C or your LDL-P, we're just going to adjust this one gear, I'm going to reject it. Because I think my ApoE3/4 status is part of a larger biological story. And I'm going to start by trusting my body until my body gives me a reason not to. Okay, now I get to tell you about what happened just a couple weeks ago. And there's a few people in this room who got to take part in this. This is the Beautifies cholesterol experiment. For this, I actually got to get people live while we were at KetoFest to partake in this. We did the protocol I was just talking about at the Ketogane seminar, which is a bunch of people went low calorie or even fasting for 3 days, did of course the water fast in between, and then we pigged out all through the weekend, right? Then to do a morning test the morning after. And I stated my hypothesis up front. This was, by the way, a personally important thing that I really wanted to do, because one of my frustrations is medicine has so much non-science in it now, and one of the biggest frustrations I have is you have so many different trials that are performed and then never published. And that is what drug companies are allowed to do. They can perform a trial, they could do, say, 100 statin trials, and it could be normal variability finally gets caught on the positive side that they like, and that's the drug they're going to go to market with. And you know what? There's nothing we can do about it. So I wanted to be as transparent as I could. I blogged about it, live blogged about it the entire time, and I stated the hypothesis on the morning that the experiment began. It's very straightforward. Following the second phase of the higher dietary fat, I predict the resulting LDL cholesterol for the majority of participants will show a decrease when compared to the first. Not just an N of 1 now. Now I'm going to put my trust into all of these other people's hands. So, voila, this is me with PTS Diagnostics. We're doing, of course, the finger prick test. That's the cardio check, by the way, I love that. And for redundancy, we also got the blood draw. So I like that we also got not only the cardio check test, but we also got the blood draws on top of that. We then proceeded to pig out like crazy, a lot. That steak, by the way, I feel this is an improper photo because I should have taken it a little bit earlier when I had the 2 extra pats of butter. So really there's 4 pats of butter. Just want to say that with full disclosure. And yeah, by the end of the weekend, you're seeing a lot of people who've partied a lot. They're pretty full. So what happened? Well, this was our very first person coming in. This is Friday, right? Day before and Monday. Over here you see the LDL cholesterol on the other side. I'm just going to go ahead and wander through these.
Yeah.
22 entrants. We had 3 that went up slightly. All the rest, all of them, all of them, 19 had a decrease between 5 and 38%. And I really want to emphasize something very important, which is, notice, this is the gambit of LDL-C, right? They didn't start at high. All of them, whether they were high or low, when they gorged on fat through the weekend, saw a decrease. Across the board, averaging all of them, including the ones that went up slightly, a decrease of 16%, which equated to 25.7 milligrams per deciliter drop in 3 days. 3 days. This is why the inversion pattern changes everything. First of all, many reducing dietary fat or even attempting an extended fast before taking a cholesterol blood test, assuming it will lower it. But indeed, this is likely spiking it. I've had many people write into me about this. In one of my first presentations earlier this year, I spoke of somebody, Jill, who I still, by the way, email back and forth with. And she went through a succession of getting lower and lower dietary fat and then eventually fasting fully, and her cholesterol scores got higher and higher and higher. And it wasn't until she tried my protocol that she brought it way down and then promptly fired her GP for insisting that you needed to do the stats the entire time. Conversely, many who feel their medication or their therapy is protective may actually have more dietary fat, and the expectation is less relevant, thus lowering the score. If I could have had just a little more shenanigans, I would just be selling you guys sugar pills and saying this will lower your cholesterol, but only if you eat a lot of fat with it. You know what? I can make a lot of money.
Don't tell the pharmaceutical company.
Yes. And here's the worst part. This is really, really bad. Those at or nearing the end of life care often experience reduced appetite, right? Which may be resulting in a higher total in LDL cholesterol. So, keeping this in mind, you can understand why it is that I've been surprised that there's not more association between high cholesterol and all-cause mortality. Because that's baked into the pot, right? And this is why, this is going to be my final bullet point, and it's a hard one. This is the worst part. Every cholesterol study that doesn't tightly control for the dietary fat for the 3 days before blood draws may be ignoring the biggest confounder. So this is the red pill, which is if the inversion pattern stands, if they can't falsify this, it's a reset. Because how can I trust any study that's not watching for that thing which can so quickly and easily shift it, as I've shown you over and over again today? That's my talk. Thank you so much. Yes?
So, I would agree with my patterns generally agree with yours. I fast, say, for 7 days. I will get the highest cholesterol ever, and if I add food back in general, energy back in, you'll drop cholesterol. Now, the interesting part is the lowest cholesterol I can get is by adding a lot of carbohydrate, which is also energy.
It's funny you bring this up. I didn't have enough time to fit it in, but I actually did a recent experiment. You can look it up. It's, I think I call it Cholesterol Research Breakthrough. And there's a second part of that I just literally just completed. And how am I doing on time? Can I give a long answer to this? Okay. So, you remember how I talked about lean mass hyperresponders, right? And what were the 2 things very common before talking about the energy demands? Their adipose tissue is lower, and their glycogen stores are lower. So what I did was I planned a 10-day experiment where I had a keto shake because I wanted it to be exactly one variable. I had a keto shake, and I even drank it on a particular schedule, and then got my blood tested on a specific schedule for 5 days. Sound sane? I am. Got to control for all the variables. And then the next 5 days, I swapped out 500 calories of the 3,000 calories for carbs, bringing it up to 95 grams of carbs per day. Now, if it was just about the composition of carbs to fat, you would expect whatever change it would be would hit there and maintain. But instead, you see a gap slowly forming and then eventually falling. And I actually ended up having the lowest LDL-C score that I've yet had. It was at, I want to say, at 140.
Which correlates perfectly with mine. But, I mean, I haven't done it in the same detail you have.
Yeah.
Because I was a low-fat vegan, high-carb, low-fat vegan. I was a low-carb, high-fat vegan for a long time. And at that point, I had LDLs of 90. Okay.
Yeah.
If I do a 7-day fast today, my LDLs will be like 175.
Yeah.
And if I'm eating my normal low-carb keto diet, my LDLs are around 140-ish. You know, so it's in the same pattern you're talking about.
But to the larger point, it's the glycogen stores. Unfortunately, the only way I can truly verify this is to get muscle biopsies. Which, I'm sure my wife is going to draw a line somewhere. Right? That's probably.
It's just a small needle, Dave. It's okay.
Yes. But anyway, yes. To your point.
I can also drive my triglycerides to the lowest level by eating a lot more carbohydrates.
Okay, interesting.
I mean, obviously I'm not insulin, I mean, all that kind of stuff that would drive the triglycerides higher by having, you know, high glucose intake.
Right.
You know, so if I eat a lot of glucose, and I'm a patient of Steve Gundry, and he says, oh, you know, I want your triglycerides below 50, and I'm like, well, I'm going to get there, Steve, is, you know, I got to eat a lot of carbs, which he's, you know, like, yeah, okay. And he says, he looked, he thought about it, and he said, yeah, you're right. I mean, I understand in your situation, that's what's going to happen.
No, it would be interesting. I'd like to see those numbers, especially in the triglycerides. I should probably get to. Does anyone else have any other questions? Yes.
Yeah. What do you feel about the theory that in ApoE4 the LDL particle clearance is longer?
Yeah.
As in it takes long, like it has longer residence. Has
for
longer residence time.
LDL particles
Yeah.
for like a week, say a week or more, rather than 3 to 4 days, 5 days, 6 days.
I think I'm skeptical only for my own data. Again, I'm an ApoE3/4. And I see enormous clearance based on my energy status, per what we were talking about before, and including the other data. For example, the lowest LDLP score that I had was also in my carb swap experiment. Right?
That was 3 days.
No, that was actually a total of 10 days, and the second 5 days, at the end of the second 5 days, I think I had around 1,000 something. And I normally hovered around like 2,200, right? But again, to kind of get to your point, the longer residence time is not, everybody's afraid of the longer residence time only because of what they see from the deleterious effects that they see from these studies.
Oxidation, longer
Yeah.
time for oxidation.
Correct. That's the assumption, is that the oxidation gets higher.
It's only a theory.
Exactly. And the reason why I really want to emphasize how the theory aspect of that troubles me is that I believe that there are, well, it's not just, I don't just believe it, I see lots of evidence that there are basically good reasons and bad reasons that you may have high LDL cholesterol and high LDL particle count. For example, most people don't know this, bodies can upregulate LDLP in response to an infectious event. And that's because they can bind to pathogens to clear them, right? Well, a lot of people assume that LDL, low-density lipoproteins are like the damsel, and the reactive oxygen species is coming along like a pirate and hijacks it, and then runs it into the arterial wall, right? But here's the thing. I keep looking at a lot of these things, and from a system standpoint, I go, well, reactive oxygen species is almost like antimatter in the body. Like, it's so bad. If you learn about the covalent bonds and the unpaired electrons, really bad juju, right? And I can't help but think, how can I not come to the conclusion, given that we already see low-density lipoproteins bind to pathogens in an infectious event, that might not also be their job with reactive oxygen species, that they're the cop trying to capture the reactive oxygen species, run it off the road. Because from a cost-benefit standpoint, I would want to contain it. And the means by which I can contain it, if that's to ultimately get it into a lipid pool and then have the macrophages come and so forth, that's fine, because you know what? There's already this entire police force of HDL particles on standby, ready to deal with it. None of us are really afraid of atherosclerosis per se. We're afraid of progressive atherosclerosis, right? Just like none of us are really afraid of cholesterol running through our vascular system. We're afraid of it building up in our arterial wall. And that's the problem, is people need to look at the scene of the crime. And the scene of the crime, if the endothelial cells had nothing at all to do with low-density lipoproteins, I could think there's a much stronger case. But here's something that I didn't get a chance to get in here as well, is early on I found out that actually damaged endothelial cells express LDL receptors, specifically LDL receptors. Yeah, they get exposed to growth factor, particularly platelet-derived growth factor. And so if there's any hard evidence of a call for help, specifically for LDL particles, that's the best you've got. So unless you can control for the reparative aspects of an LDL particle, it's just as good as me saying doctors are killers, because they seem to be closely associated with death, right? It seems more likely people die in the presence of a doctor than they die outside of the presence of a doctor, right? Or the same thing with fires and firemen and so forth. So you have to control for that aspect of it before you can make the claim that that's in fact the cause. It's just that simple. Yeah.
So when you do your research, do you subdivide the fat, or is all fat equal in terms of driving the inversion? So monounsaturated, polyunsaturated,
quality of
fat.
So my general eating habits, here's where it gets a little tricky, because a lot of people assume that because I'm so meticulous about collection of my data, I must therefore be very meticulous about the food that I eat, and that's not true. I have a general composition goal, but the truth is I only have so much mental bandwidth. It's already a lot for me to control it. Like, I already impact my social life quite a bit on just capturing all the data, but if I were to tell my wife or my friends every time we're trying to go out that, no, I need to be sure I get enough linoleic acid today, right? Or something like that. It needs to be of a certain grams, then I'm like back there with the chef and I'm like, you're using a little bit too much canola oil here, and I'm like, it just won't work, right? So generally speaking, I know that my saturated fat ratio is relatively high, particularly for even somebody who's on a low-carb, high-fat diet. It's probably, I want to say it's somewhere in the neighborhood of about 40%. It's a fairly large amount,
40% of the total.
And that's just of the fat total. The polyunsaturated fat, I try to keep as low as possible. Probably the one thing that's still a Achilles heel for me is I still have like ranch dressing, which of course doesn't just have PUFAs, but it has a whole lot of bad other things in it. But generally speaking, I would say that I want to say it's about equal parts saturated fat, monounsaturated fats, with a smaller fraction on poly. But as far as like even further subdividing it, I haven't really gotten into those levels yet. To kind of get to a larger point that you're making, I did do an 11-day test last year, where for 11 days I tried to move down my saturated fat, bring up my monounsaturated, and naturally I brought up my polys a little bit to see how much that would impact my inversion pattern. And it actually had very little effect. I'd like to do it again at some point, but I really got sick of avocados, so I got to rev myself up for it. Yeah.
When you did your N=20 experiment, were you expecting that 3 people might not, or do you have any theory as to why 3 people, their cholesterol is higher?
Yeah, well, I mean, that's why I made the hypothesis that I predicted the majority would do it. I didn't think it was going to be 100%.
Okay. So you have
Again, seeing all of the lines going down, seeing that the mean average was a drop of 16%, that I did expect, and that's why I can make the hypothesis in that fashion. The fact that some of them rose by like 1 or 2%, I wasn't too surprised by. But to be fair, this actually wasn't a Dave standards test. The real study I would like to do, which I hope to do at some point in time in the near future, will actually be a ward study. I'm actually going to sequester people to a house. I've even got the friend lined up who's going to provide it, right? We're going to be eating to a meal plan, and we're going to be filming everything, and it's going to be entirely transparent, right? Because, by the way, I think that's how good science is. Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Maybe you can help me raise the funds for it on my Kickstarter.
Nutrition
sometime. So, yeah.
study we can trust.
Yeah, but to get to the point, the problem is while I can tell everybody to gorge on fat, it could be, there might be some differences in composition of their carbs. It could be that they ate at some restaurants, they thought they were getting fat, but it actually was a different ratio of carbs to fat or something along those lines. The protein might have changed it. The problem is we can't see these variables in isolation very easily. So that's why I couldn't really easily answer that question. So you were saying?
I'm ApoE4.Info, and I was just curious if you talked to other people. I was like almost 100% saturated fat for about 3.5 years with no PUFAs. And then I found out I was ApoE4 and went to avocado oil, high oleic sunflower oil, olive oil, and my triglycerides dropped in half.
Really?
I was
Interesting.
wondering, but I'm very strict keto, 85, 5, 10 for brain cancer. So I'm controlling the quality of my fats really highly. So I was just wondering if you've seen that with other people at all, or?
I've certainly not met another person that I know of that's been like 100% saturated fat. It sounds actually like a lot of fun.
Oh, it was awesome. I'm a farmer, so it's like
Yeah.
make the butter, render the lard, make the tallow.
But I would definitely,
I
yeah.
have a question about that, because tallow and lard are half mono and half saturated.
Yeah, they do. I was very, very high with coconut oil and MCT oil, which are like 90% and 99%. And then, so I did have a few that were lower in saturated fat, but I was high on the spectrum of, at the very, very top of the highest saturated fats possible, because I was reading that that was most beneficial for my brain cancer, and that was before I found out that I was ApoE4. So,
I gotta inject one thing real quick, by the way, and I actually have this in my write-up on doing the protocol for my site. I do find that there are confounders with using MCT oil and coconut oil, mainly because the medium chain triglycerides, as we're told, I'd like to also isolate this out, but there's definitely a higher ketone breakdown that appears to come up more often at those levels. And it's somewhat anecdotal, but it seems to kind of throw off some other lipid variables when I've had some people that have been doing that for a short period of time. I think actually the Ketogains people in the back actually have a little more experience in this area in particular. And you may even ask them about that. But
I guess just the percentage of saturated fat was higher for me in general.
relatively
compared to,
speaking. Right.
Where I am now is completely different.
Yeah.
I just want to mention that on our website, ApoE4.Info, that's a pattern we see regularly.
Yeah, I've
So
been
when
on your
people,
website, that's where I got the
reduce
information.
the
actually.
saturated fat,
But back to
they,
doesn't matter.
they do get lower LDLC, LDLP, higher HDLC, and lower triglycerides. I mean, we see it.
It happened in 4 weeks. for me.
Right,
It was
and we see it in a
amazing.
dose-dependent fashion, so I'd say homozygotes can change it even more quickly. So,
Interesting.
yeah, so I don't know what it means, but.
Love your website, thank you.
Thank
It was
you.
very helpful.
Thank you.
Yeah, in the back.
Couple of things. One is, on a lot of your measurements, are you just using the cardio check? And then also, can you drill it back into our entity for people high CAC and LP small a that my elevated levels are?
Well, actually, I really want to emphasize one thing. I want to be sure everybody leaves this room with this. I try to be a good scientist. Part of being a good scientist is not making a declaration on things that you don't, in fact, know. So I am very upfront about the fact that I don't know that it's not true that high levels of LDLC, high levels of LDLP don't, in fact, cause atherosclerosis. It very well could be that they are independent markers. I just contend that the case is shockingly weak. It's very impressively bad. But a lot of things also turn out to be an indicator from the other side. So take LP little a. Your LP little a may be elevated because in fact you are fighting an internal infection. Or you may actually have higher levels of oxidative stress. LP little a is pretty good for that as well, if that's what it's doing. Now, if you talk to a lipidologist, they'll be like, no, having high levels of LP(a) means that they're just more likely to get oxidized. That's itself going to be a problem. What I would say is try to find your inner scientist, find these different things that may or may not change these numbers and why they change those numbers, and then take that data back to yourself. Nobody here can take ownership of your health more than you can.
So that's why I question about I've got a cardio.
Oh, a cardio check.
Check.
Yeah.
So most of your measurements are, obviously we all can't just go to the phlebotomist every time we feel
That's how, that's my life. I wake up in the morning and I'm like, seems like a phlebotomist day.
And we don't all have NMR machines in our basement either, so.
I'm working on that. I want to get that.
So I guess my question is the data that you were taking, was it a lot of it, was it NMR based or was it cardio?
No. All of the things that you just saw, they were all NMRs. The only thing that you saw up here that was a cardio check was the initial data that I had on the 22 volunteers at the Keto Fest experiment. But even then, their core cholesterol data that wasn't NMRs, but they were lipid profiles, those will eventually be going up on the website. It's unfortunately for LP(a), you are going to need to go to a phlebotomist. There's no cardio check for that I'm aware of.
Have you tested your cardio check against blood tests?
Quite literally, just got those yesterday,
Okay.
and I want to see myself.
Because I have a cardio check, and my sense was that it gave you the right direction of things, but it was, if you were looking for the kind of data that you're presenting to us.
Yeah, I don't. Here's where it gets kind of interesting, because I really didn't get married to the cardio check thing until quite literally a couple months ago, because I had heard it in passing, I want to say maybe even a year ago, but I had heard it wasn't that accurate. And it wasn't until I saw another presentation by a gentleman named Ben Best, who was using a cardio check, and he was tracking his triglycerides, and the curves were surprisingly strong. Now, I believe you're absolutely right. There's some margin of error, but given the internal, this is the things I can't say, but they've shown me some internal documents. It's like, actually, this looks pretty good. If the margin is, even 5%, that's more than acceptable to me. I prefer 0%, but it's more than acceptable for me, particularly given that I have to deal with stupid glucometers all the time, as I'm sure many of you guys do. The legal limit of margin of error for those are preposterous. Really hate glucometers.
Yeah.
Okay, should we wrap?